What if I told you that one of Batman Beyond's most unforgettable villains is exactly the kind of character the network didn't want? She's not a school bully, a Joker knockoff in neon face paint, or a cautionary tale about homework or hormones. Instead, she's a hired weapon in a boardroom war. In Batman Beyond's third episode, Blackout, the new Batman has to deal with corporate sabotage, government contracts, and a CEO who treats murder like a line item in a budget, which is pretty much the opposite of what the network envisioned. This is the episode that introduces us to Ink, a different kind of villain. She's less of a homicidal maniac and more the personification of Derek Powers' corporate policy. She's a black shape swirling through steel and circuitry, destroying Wayne Powers' rival Foxteca from the inside, so Powers can secure a lunar defense contract. She doesn't make speeches, hell, she barely talks at all. She is a professional. Liquid efficiency. And she almost kills the new Batman before he really gets started. The executives wanted a future Batman kids could see themselves in, juggling schools, relationship, and everyday problems. Instead, the creative team sidestepped the mandate to tell a more somber story that still feels relevant today. The real villain is Ink. Ink that signs contracts. Ink that authorizes projects. Ink that decides which company wins and which one burns. In a world run by holograms and encrypted bids, ink shouldn't matter anymore, but it does, because ink is the moment proposals become permanent. A signature on a piece of paper makes something official and cannot be taken back lightly. And the villain, Ink, is that permanence brought to life. She seeps through infrastructure the way corruption seeps through institutions. She stains everything she touches, and she makes her way to the Batcave to end the life of the new Batman. Before Terry can worry about exams and dating, he has to survive a completely different kind of superpowered threat that the original Batman rarely had to deal with, and he almost loses his life for it. Blackout did more than introduce a shapeshifting villain, it introduced the future's true battleground, and nearly drowned Batman in it. So by now I'm sure many of you are aware of the origins of Batman Beyond, but for those that aren't, remember every video is somebody's first, give me a few moments to set the scene. In the late 1990s, the DCAU creative team were just finishing up their latest seasons of Superman the Animated Series and the new Batman adventures, and they were confident that they would be renewed. However, Warner Brothers executive Jamie Kellner summoned Bruce Timm to his office to let him know that they were done with Superman and Batman. Sure, the shows were doing okay, but they hadn't captured the imagination of the youngest viewers, the elusive 3-year-olds. So a radical change was handed down. Their next project would be a new show starring a teenage Batman. Disheartened and not wanting to scrap everything that came before, the team proposed doing a show about Bruce Wayne's successor in the future. Delighted, Kellner greenlit the show, sight unseen. He had cited Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a source of inspiration and how all of the adventures centered around the school, but what the writers delivered was pretty different, although tonally similar. I've already talked about how the 2-part opening story Rebirth perfectly set the stage for a successor to Batman, linked to in the info button, so add that to your watch later list if you haven't already seen it, but it also establishes the world of Neo-Gotham. It was a sanitized, futuristic hellscape controlled by the billionaires and the megacorporations, and the most villainous CEO of all was Derek Powers. Powers had taken over Wayne Enterprises decades ago and contributed to Bruce Wayne's retreat from public life. After connecting with Bruce and investigating the murder of his father, Terry McGinnis unintentionally exposed Powers to a lethal virus which could only be treated with high doses of radiation. This ultimately turned him into the cackling villain Blight. And while not a literal sequel, Blackout continues the story. Here, Terry is officially Bruce Wayne's assistant as Wayne starts to take a more prominent role within the company again. The episode opens with a rival of Wayne Powers, Foxteca, going up in flames. This company was founded by longtime ally Lucius Fox after Powers fired him when he took over, and they are currently competing for government contracts. Rather than putting together a better bid, Powers had ordered sabotage. And this tells you exactly what kind of a man Powers is. He may act like an apex capitalist where the strong survive and the weak fall into bankruptcy, but he doesn't play fair. Although saying that out loud, maybe that does make him an apex capitalist. Sure, he doesn't do any of the dirty work himself, but that doesn't make him any less responsible. Instead, he contracts Ink, a superpowered mercenary that specializes in industrial espionage. So yes, we're only 3 episodes in and the show has already completely disregarded the directive to keep things simple for the kids. Now, being a contractor makes Ink quite different to most of the villains we've seen before in their earlier shows. For her, this is a job, it's what she does to make a living. It's not personal and she doesn't have a vendetta. She's hired like legal counsel and paid like a consultant, making her the physical manifestation of corporate ruthlessness. Now, something I mentioned in my earlier video about Ink, once again linked to in the info button, is that she was designed before they had any idea on what to do with the characters. Producer Alan Burnett had told the team that they should resist revisiting existing villains, with a few notable exceptions, and instead focus on coming up with new characters. So James Tucker, then a character designer and storyboard artist, started riffing on the idea of a weird globby character, as he put it, and let the writers run wild with her. And this is where it gets poetic. Tucker named her Ink, but without any real idea of who she was as a character. The writers took the ball and ran with it. As I alluded to earlier, in the corporate world, Ink is used to sign contracts, authorize mergers, pass legislation, and so on. Significantly, Ink can ruin lives without ever raising a voice. Just how many people have been killed across the world because of the stroke of a pen? Ink spreads and it stains, and Ink, the villain, perfectly embodies that. She seeps into infrastructure, she destroys from within. She is the lethal signature made flesh, or whatever globby material she's made from. Yes, on the surface this is a story about a shape-shifting villain attacking buildings, but the subtext is all about how corporate greed weaponizes human beings. It's just as much about how systems designed to keep our world running destroy the lives of innocent people. Some viewers may only see the action, and you know what, that's fine, you do you. But it's equally about the inherent corruption that is tolerated by the elites. Case in point, Bruce Wayne knows that Powers is responsible for targeting Foxteca. He tells him to cut it out, but Powers feigns ignorance, convincing absolutely no one. And with recent revelations about how the rich and powerful have trodden on everyday people, particularly women and children, it still feels very relevant. Everyone seems to know how awful Powers is, but he can't be touched, and I bet you can think of at least half a dozen real-world figures that are much the same. I think it's worth highlighting that Derek Powers is key to most of season 1 of this show. While he wasn't the big bad in every episode, he was central to almost half of the stories. He brought in Ink, pushed Shriek into villainy and essentially resurrected Mr. Freeze, and all of that was separate to his own criminal acts as Blight. He embodies long-term corporate corruption, but he wound up getting killed off at the end of the first season. I'm told that the decision not to bring him back was made to appease the executives who didn't exactly imagine that their hot new Batman show would focus on old men and boardroom antics. The remaining seasons tended to focus more on high school. Clearly, corporate villainy was just too abstract for the intended audience, although I can't help but think that some of the social commentary might have hit a little too close to home. Despite casting off Powers, Ink is a villain that the show kept coming back to. For as much as she operated in the world of corporate espionage, she acts as a bridge between that and more traditional superpowered adventure stories too, plus a good amount of body horror. She may present herself as a professional, but that doesn't mean that she can't enjoy her work too. When Powers tells her to shift her focus to killing Batman, she hitches a ride on the Batmobile and gets taken directly to the Batcave. And it's in this scene that arguably one of the least child-friendly scenes happens. Ink toys with Batman, squeezing him before forcing herself down his throat, and she presents it as a kiss, which makes it even more sickening. Terry may have been prepared for a more traditional foe, but he's completely out of his depth when it comes to superpowered villains. Fortunately, he has the support of someone that knows a thing or two about escaping from suffocating shapeshifters, the Elder Batman. In a delightful bit of fan service, the original Batman improvises a costume, popping on the goggles and hat of his childhood idol, the Grey Ghost, and hoses her down. And this scene brings together the two eras of Batman neatly. In old Gotham, crime was more theatrical, costumed supervillains and weird science rejects lashing out at the world that hurt them, while Neo-Gotham's crime is corporate and contractual. That contrast is nicely demonstrated as Ink walks through the trophy room, smashing display cabinets, ripping apart relics. In a further nod to the classic characters, Terry ends up using Mr. Freeze's old cold gun to trap Ink, showing that the oldies are still goodies, and drops her off with the police. By the time Blackout ends, it's clear that Batman Beyond isn't just telling stories about a teen in a batsuit. It's showing us a future where power is measured in contracts, influence, and the invisible hands that move a city from boardrooms instead of back alleys. Ink could very easily have just been a new Lady Clayface, and that would have been fine, but instead she's the embodiment of this new era, a lethal consequence of decisions made with ink and ambition, and Terry's struggle here is more than physical. It's his first real lesson in navigating the moral and practical complexities of a world where evil wears the suit of a CEO. In my opinion, this episode is so compelling because it balances spectacle with symbolism. On one level, you have thrilling action, a polymorphic villain demolishing buildings, dramatic chases, thumping music, and Batman almost drowning in the Batcave, as well as clever callbacks to the original era with the Grey Ghost costume and Mr. Freeze's cold gun. On the other, you have the insidious commentary of systemic corruption and the human cost of unchecked ambitions. But the thing that really helps Blackout stand out is the fact that it trusts its audience. The episode doesn't dumb down the stakes for younger viewers. It assumes they can understand tension, consequences, and moral ambiguity. It gives us a villain who isn't a caricature, a hero who can be hurt, and a world that feels like it could exist just beyond the horizon. In fact, you could argue it's the world we're living in now. Watching Terry face Ink is instructive, showing us that heroism isn't just about fighting monsters in costumes, but it's also about confronting power itself. In the end, Blackout is more than an early episode of a new Batman show. It acts as a blueprint for what makes Batman Beyond timeless. It tells us that the most dangerous villains aren't always the ones screaming from rooftops. Instead, they're the unseen hands that destroy lives with the single stroke of a pen. Okay, that's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time. When I return on Monday, I'm going to mark April Fool's Day by talking about an early episode of Batman the Animated Series that was gutted by the censors, but still delivered a fairly memorable Joker story. I want to talk about the stranger danger of Be a Clown. And next Friday, I'm going back to my latest The Batman Villain Poll to discuss an obscure 90s supervillain from the comics that was dramatically reimagined for the show. We're going to talk about Gearhead. Hope to see you then.